Hi there, everyone. I'm David Benitez, and this is Extreme Vocal Institute. And here we regularly get a lot of questions about breathing when it comes to metal vocals. There's a lot of discrepancy around this topic, and many people are unsure of how much or how little they're supposed to be using air-wise at any given time, because there's a lot of difference between different types of sounds and different types of people. And there are many different answers floating around the internet as well. The most common problems when it comes to metal vocals also stem from the overuse or underuse of air as well. Oftentimes people think they need to just push as hard as they can, both to activate the sound and to actually send it out in the way they want it to get the kind of energy and intensity they're going for. And usually what happens here is it's just too much for your system. The vocals can't handle the amount of force you're using, and eventually they get way too tired, they get burnt out easier, and this leads to lots of friction, lots of rubbing, and this is where lots of different types of vocal damage come from. On the opposite side of that coin, there are some out there that are also a little too timid when it comes to their air support and don't give it enough juice. And when the diaphragm and your air support aren't doing what they need to be doing, the muscles of the throat and in the vocal tract start to try and compensate for what's not happening down here. And then you essentially get the same exact problem. You get rubbing, you get friction, you get vocal damage over time. So the name of the game is balance. Just like with everything else we talk about here, it's about trying to find what the right amount of air is at any given moment. But in order to even get to that point, we need to understand how to breathe first. And we're going to be covering a couple different things about that today. Now, where many of these problems stem from initially, just like with a lot of other things vocally, is how we carry ourselves on a day-to-day basis throughout our lives. In modern society, there's a whole lot of sitting. Sitting at home, sitting on the couch, sitting at work, sitting in the car, sitting with friends. There's a whole lot of sitting going on. And because of that, gravity has not been kind. What happens is a lot of people tend to develop this type of curved shoulder posture. See how my shoulder is kind of in front of my back here? And then the head ends up kind of being leaned forward, and we get this spine bent forward kind of posture, and we end up very often sitting like this without realizing it, especially if you're someone that's sitting a lot for work, and say you're on a computer or writing or in a lot of meetings. It's very easy to develop this type of posture without noticing it. And what happens is this puts the body under a lot of strain. For example, the shoulders now can't operate functionally because of where they're being placed, and different things in terms of your ability to breathe and vocalize and just make sound in general is strained, because the back and the neck are doing all of this work to keep your head, which is heavy, from falling through all of this dead air and just smacking into the ground. Versus if we can line things up appropriately, we can have the body more so work with us rather than against us. What I'm talking about here is something called alignment. And I borrow this from the classical and more operatic way of thinking when it comes to the voice. And what this has to do with is your posture and how you poise yourself for proper phonation, proper singing, proper sound production. And we do this from the feet up. We do it from the bottom up because we're trying to create as stable a foundation for ourselves as physically possible. Now, where this starts is the feet, like I said, and you want to make sure when you're standing, and it is best to stand when practicing, whenever possible, to have your feet about hip width apart. Not shoulder width, but hip width to make sure your weight is being evenly distributed to both sides. Make sure to keep your knees lightly flexed, not locked, because generally that's already bad for you. But you want to make sure everything's nice and loose, nice and springy, so that you're able to move freely, but you're also not rigid. This is also going to allow blood flow and oxygen flow to the lower half of your body, which is going to help keep everything nice and neutral and relaxed. With the hips, you want to make sure you're not pushed forward or leaning back, but you want that to be nice and neutral as well. You want the pelvis just nice and lined up. And what we've done now is aligned ourselves from the bottom half to create a stable first part of the foundation. Nice and loose, not rigid. From here, Now the difficult part comes up, and we have to align the upper half of the body without creating additional tension. This is particularly difficult if you find that you actually have this curved posture very often, because this is going to feel a little different and might be a little hard to wrap your head around at first, so I'm going to demonstrate for you here. We need to make sure that we line up the spine and the shoulders and the arms and the neck and the head without necessarily doing a kind of militaristic puff the chest out. Because pulling the shoulders back like that actually just creates more tension in the opposite direction, which isn't helpful to the situation. The way I think of this is I imagine a dotted line pointing right here out of the sternum, and I'll demonstrate this with my hand. I'll imagine this line is a total solid structure. It's all one thing, and I'm going to take the entire structure and I'm just going to point the line up. So watch carefully. I'm going to point the line up. See what's happening? There we are. I'm going to put my hands down and watch where my arms fall. See that? Now my arms have fallen to where they're supposed to be naturally, to my sides, and you can see the chest is totally opened up. Now the shoulders, the arms, and the spine are all lined up. I'm standing nice and straight. The spine is lined up, and everything's much more open and poised for healthy breathing. However, you may have noticed that now I'm just staring at the ceiling. So I'm just going to bring my head angle down. And look at how straight up and down everything is now. If you can do this on your own at home, take a moment to align yourself while watching this. Once you achieve this nice open posture, go ahead and take a nice, slow, deep breath. Feel that? Feel how open everything is and how the air really rushed into the body without much effort? This is how breathing can and should feel all the time. You don't want your body to be fighting you when it comes to your air. A lot of times when people are trying to breathe and force that breathing with improper posture, you end up with a lot of noise. Have you ever noticed when you're trying to vocalize in the moment, say in between phrases or in between words, you'll notice this kind of breathing, that kind of gasp or noises, or if you're someone breathing through the nose or the teeth, or you'll get that gasp or that gargle kind of sensation. All of this noise comes from the body fighting you a bit when you're breathing. Sometimes people get confused here because they think that that noise means you're actually getting a lot of air. Like if you gasp, that must mean you're getting enough air for what it is you're doing, when in actuality, what you're hearing is how much air you're not getting. What you're hearing is resistance. This is blockage. You're hearing the air moving around different parts of the body, whether it be something through the nostrils and the nasal cavity, the teeth, the tongue being in the way, parts of the vocal tract closing, the vocal cords themselves coming together in the instance of the gasp or other things. You're hearing the air having to travel around this blockage before it actually gets to where it's going, which is the lungs, before the oxygen actually gets dispersed throughout the rest of your body. If there's this much resistance, the body starts to tighten up in these areas. Like you'll notice right around here, if you just gasp, you'll notice a ring of tightness in this part of the body. And that's because it's fighting you a little bit, because it kind of feels like it's under attack. The problem is hearing the breath versus breathing silently. Go ahead right now and like I just did, stand up, sit up nice and straight, and take a nice, deep, silent breath. Feel how much faster the air flows and how you become full of air almost in a split second this way. That's because your body isn't fighting you anymore. Now, the natural things are starting to happen, and you're just getting this big, open, essentially effortless expansion. And this is what we want in terms of the inhale, because this is ensuring that we have that full tank of gas whenever we need it. You'll notice this way, you don't actually have to try to breathe. The air just kind of comes in by itself. The human body already knows how to do this. So if you can kind of shut off a little bit and keep that breathing quiet, even during very intense songs or very quick, fast-paced songs, you'll be able to get that kind of air you need in a split second, essentially. Now you'll notice if you can breathe nice and aligned and nice and full, you'll notice more movement than just here in the abdomen. The diaphragm is larger than people realize and actually bubbles up underneath these ribs here and is connected by little bits of tissue and other things and acts essentially as the floor to the torso. Now, going back a little bit, the sternum, like we talked about earlier, on me starts about here, ends about here. And the ribs are connected to that, wrap around the heart and the lungs and all that good stuff, and then connect back here at the spine. But the rib cage continues beyond this, and they get shorter and shorter and shorter past the sternum, but they're not connected to anything in the middle, even though they are still connected here at the back. Now, because of this, when you're breathing, it's almost like the feeling of having gills. And you're kind of breathing in through your sides. I want you to kind of just stand or sit nice and still, nice and relaxed. And I want you to breathe and pretend you have gills like you're a fish and like you're breathing in through your sides. Go ahead and do that for a second. And feel that expansion. Can you see that here right now? I'll put my hands here to kind of demonstrate where the movement is. Watch this. Lots of movement. After a long time of practicing this, you can train this type of flexibility that you're seeing here. If you're doing this for the first time on your own at home, the movement might not be that intense, but not to worry, you'll be able to relax your way into more movement over time because essentially the lower ribs and the back form this somewhat ball and socket type relationship where you can actually get a fair amount of flexibility and movement in this area. Thinking of it as gills kind of triggers it a little bit. So that's what I want you to think about when you're breathing this way. Now, the combination of keeping aligned, breathing silently, and the gills concept will help you to be able to get that breath of fresh air in a split second whenever you need it. Now, the important thing is understanding how to use that air in the moment. This is where it gets kind of tricky because different types of sounds require different amounts of what's called air pressure. It's not just about the air itself, it's what you're doing with it. People get confused when it comes down to what air pressure actually is and what it feels like. To clear the air a little bit, as it were, I'm going to have you guys take a nice deep breath for a moment and then hold a hissing noise for about 5 seconds. I'll do it first. Nice and consistent, nice and smooth. Now we're going to do it together. Notice that deeper abdominal pressure that isn't the same as an ab flex. It's not the same as taking off like a rocket or squeezing as hard as you can. It's more subtle than that, and it's more consistent than that. What you're feeling is proper air pressure, and you're feeling that at your center, and this is how you should be feeling it. You'll notice that when you breathe out this way, the air coming out doesn't all rush out at once because it's not like the air is just all falling out. You want to make sure the air doesn't just escape. Using this type of pressure is actually what makes the amount of air you took in initially last, not just longer, but the exact amount of time you need it to last. Because remember, you're the one controlling how much pressure you're using at any given time. Example, now I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to make a quieter hissing sound for 15 seconds. You'll notice that at no point did the volume of the hiss fluctuate, and I didn't lose all of my air either. I was able to scale back the amount of pressure. Even though it was less, that sensation was still there. It was just less of it. You don't want it to just go away. entirely. Because if you don't feel any control here, you're just letting go of your air and not actually having or giving yourself any say in what is being done with it. On the other side of that coin, now I'm going to take a deep breath. I'll make a louder hissing noise for 3 seconds. You'll notice it's louder. I didn't use up all my air at once, not by far. It wasn't that much louder than the other things I was doing, but it was more pressure than I had been using previously. You can determine how much or how little pressure you need at any given moment by kind of adjusting like this, increasing or decreasing this sensation in the abdomen ever so slightly. Even with that louder, harder hiss, even then it doesn't feel like I'm taking off like a rocket or just pushing as hard as I can. Because if you're thinking in extremes like this, you are letting go of and depriving yourself of actually having control over your own actions. It's that excessive force that leads to the overuse of air, and it's the total letting go that leads to the lack thereof, if that makes sense. One thing I want you to think about is back to that more medium level kind of middle of the road hiss. Fun fact, about that level of air pressure is all you will need for anything ever again. Nothing the human body can do and no sound that anyone can make, regardless of what you may think, needs more air pressure than this. And I'll explain why. Big open sound, totally uninterrupted, totally unshaped, undistorted, clean, pretty, pure, is going to require the most air pressure because all of the channels that your sound is traveling through are the most open in these instances. Everything is totally wide open, and you want to make sure you're giving it enough push and enough pressure to actually stabilize the sound and get it to all flow through these open channels without having it kind of fizzle out. If you don't apply enough air pressure when you're nice and open, the sound kind of dies out. Now, that being said, even when everything's nice and open, if you're producing any kind of sound at all, that means the vocal cords, which are smack in the middle of the vocal tract, meaning all of your air all day, every day is passing through and over these, means that when you're breathing silently, they're totally separated. As soon as you make noise, they're closed. They are touching each other. They are vibrating against each other, and they're vibrating at specific speeds, and that's what's creating pitch. But in this instance, all of the air you're breathing out, even for a totally open, relaxed note, all your air is having to travel through like this much space from the get-go, before anything volume-wise, before anything power-wise, before anything distortion or screaming-wise. Any kind of distortion is taking away space from this totally open structure. Either from, say, a belted standpoint, where you're increasing the amount of distortion on a clean sound, you're taking away space from that totally open structure to create more of an hourglass shape in different parts of the vocal tract to shoot the sound out in different ways. Or when we're screaming, regardless of the type, either false chord or fry, in either sense, we're creating more distortion, which is more interruptions to the travel path and more ways that it has to bend and twist around to get out. And because of this, we're taking away more space, which means it's getting smaller and smaller. If it's even higher pitched than that, that means additionally that there's even less space, because when the vocal cords are vibrating faster and closer together, that's what's creating higher pitches. And that's what we're using in part to make higher screams. So now there's even less space. The bottom line is, the more distorted, the more high-pitched, the more intense the screaming sound is, we're taking away more and more space, which means at the end of the day, we need to use less and less air pressure, less and less force, less and less air. So regardless of the scream you're using, at no point should you ever just be pushing and squeezing as hard as you can, because from a scientific level, that's just not how sound works in relation to the human body. So make sure you're working with yourself rather than against yourself, and you'll feel your ability to more so manipulate the sound and bend into any which direction you would like to go in, because you'll have freed up enough real estate by keeping flexible to be able to do so in the first place. Now, the more complicated aspect here is different types of sounds, as I just demonstrated, rely on different amounts of air pressure. And there is no straight one singular answer to what the right amount of air is, or how do I breathe for my screaming. And I can't necessarily answer that for you either. It depends on your own body. It depends on your own voice. It depends on everything in relation to you. So make sure you're always trying to use the minimal amount of effort for the maximum amount of output. Start there and look at that big open sound, totally neutral, like I was demonstrating earlier, and try and build from there. Add the distortion, add your screaming sounds, and try and relax the air, try and pull it back a little bit, rather than leaning into it or forcing it as hard as you can, and see if you can achieve the same kind of sound that you normally would like to go for, but balanced in, even though an unfamiliar, maybe a new and potentially healthier and safer way. This is what's going to enable us to be able to continue to make all of these sounds that we love to do and enjoy for years and years to come. So this is how to really take advantage over the relationship between your voice and your body and your breathing, to add this type of posture control, air control, breathing control to what you're doing. And even though, not to worry, in the moment, it's not like we don't want to move around or express ourselves at all when we're vocalizing, because performing totally straight up and down like a pole would be really, really boring. So just keep it in the back of your head. Keep it in the back of your mind. And remember, as you're performing, as you're vocalizing, that at any given point, you can incorporate different aspects of healthy posture and healthy breathing to better suit your situation and help yourself get through and help yourself vocalize healthier, safer, and more sustainably. If this video helped you out today, go ahead and give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We're really happy to be helping you guys out with your vocals over there at home. Until next time, thank you so much for watching, and scream responsibly.